And so this episode is an S&S episode. It's one of the I'm running starting to run low on the S&S episodes from the archive. This comes from the complete second season. And this is an episode on miracles. I wasn't in this particular episode, but this was the last episode where I was the Christian co-host on S&S. I left Skeptics and Seekers this week. This episode came out. So I posted up my Miracle solo show. That's already up on Real Seekers for you guys. But this is the group discussion that I was hinting at. I wasn't in it, but Teddi Pappas, the Christian Teddy, came in and she represented the Christian side against a gaggle of atheists to discuss miracles there. So yeah, enjoy the show. It's going to be in two parts. This is part one this week.
Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of Skeptics and Seekers. I'm your host, David the Skeptic, and I'm joined by people that I kind of found on the street because we had an absence. So taking the place of the usual seeker is the unusual seeker, Teddi. Say hello, Teddi.
Hi, everybody. This is Teddi.
Woo! She is one of our commenters on Skeptics and Seekers, and someone that I have not yet publicly called batshit crazy. Let's see how it goes. Someone put the timer to see how long that takes.
Springs eternal, David, and anything's possible.
Oh, God. Moving right along. The sane one in the group was not able to make it, but taking their place, Sarah. Hello, Sarah.
Hello there. Hi, I'm Sarah, and I think I've been on a few podcasts before, and I'm out in France at the moment and being involved in this discussion today because I was involved in the charismatic Vineyard/Toronto thing back in the 80s and 90s, so that'll be my contribution.
Good. She has actually more contribution people. That wasn't it right there. She's got more. And following Sarah, because it's not right to just have one person with an accent, we have Matt from Kansas with the worst fake British accent you've ever heard. Say hello, Matt.
Oh, well, hello, my lovelies.
You see what I mean? No. And rounding out the panel, we have Andrew from Various Endeavors.
Hello, everybody, and looking forward to the show.
Okay, very good. So what I'm going to do before I make my opening statement, by the way, we're going to be talking about miracles. This is our big miracle show today. I wrote a blog post. You can download it in ebook form. It is called something like "Miracles: the most overpromised and undelivered Christian claim," and we're going to talk about that subject today, not necessarily the ebook or the blog post, but you will be able to get it. And I do have a little bit of an opening statement, not much, but before that, I just want to give everybody a few minutes to kind of introduce themselves and their initial thoughts on miracles and what brings them here. And so I'm actually going to start off with Andrew to kick us off. Each person, you have about 5 minutes for this introduction. Don't abuse it.
Well, I won't need 5 minutes. My background is twofold. From the university perspective, I majored in computer science and theology. Eventually, I realized that I was supporting two ways of looking at the world. One of them included miracles, and I couldn't find any evidence of miracles in the other way that I looked at the world. So some of the listeners will know that I'm a guy with one eye. I am willing to bet every listener here that by the end of this show, I'll still have one eye. My point is this. It's pretty easy to get me to accept that there might be the supernatural. All we have to do is have a miracle before this show is over. I'm a test case. I've offered this on this podcast before and on numerous other podcasts. Now, will that mean that I'll accept an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving, and all-hating creator of the universe that supports or does not support torture chambers for people who don't believe in it? Well, probably not, but at least we'd have room to get the party started. So, this is one skeptic's call for actually doing a miracle and not talking about them.
Okay, Matthew.
Well, hello. As I podcast with Andrew over at what is now called Proscenium, and occasionally also on Still Unbelievable. So some of you may be familiar with me and my backstory. I grew up in the missionary culture in Zambia, Central Africa. So I was there for my formative years. So I'm very familiar with the fundamentalist Christian missionary culture and the effect that it has on foreign cultures. And I'm very familiar with what happens when miracle claims spread and you hear them as legend. And I'm familiar with many stories like that, although having never witnessed one firsthand, all I have ever experienced is third-hand stories and recollections. Later in life, grew up in the UK as, or became an adult as in the UK as, and still very much an evangelical Christian, involved in charismatic churches, even involved in a prayer for healing team for several years. No, didn't see a healing. And probably the biggest, most frustrating turning point for me on the subject of miracles was sitting at my mother's funeral about 12 years ago now. I had left the faith at that point, and seeing or listening to the minister tell bits from her life. And there's a very dramatic point in her life where she was kidnapped very briefly and released later that day. It's quite a long and distressful and very distasteful story. And the minister told an account of the story some 30 years after the event happened at her funeral, and described a part of it as a miracle, which me sitting there listening to that account knew it was a straight out lie. And that kind of account really, really frustrates me. It's a deeply personal and painful account, and to see not just misrepresentation, but outright lies told from the front of a church like that and claiming something that never happened to actually be a miracle was a very, very clear example to me of how within a single lifetime, stories that are ordinary and normal can become over retellings, and the fragility of human memory becomes something other than ordinary and normal. If a kidnapping can be in any way described as ordinary and normal. So I am very hard-nosed when it comes to claims of miracles. I demand to see evidence. I have seen many, many claims in my lifetime and not a single iota of evidence. So I am very much a hard person to convince when it comes to miracles. So that is my challenge to everybody. Andrew's eye story, I've heard it multiple times. That would really give me pause for thought, but first, let's see it happen. And that is me.
Sarah.
Hello, sorry, I was just unmuting my mute button. And also I jumped the gun a little bit at the beginning by introducing myself in a bit more detail then, when I should have saved it for now. So anyway, I've been also brought up in the UK for most of my life. I now live in France, but I was brought up in the Christian home. We went to a variety of churches, starting with Baptists and Methodists and Salvation Army in France when we go and visit friends and family over there, but also then for a significant chunk of my adolescence we were in the charismatic movement, which was part of what was happening in the States, and later in life I also went to the Vineyard, which was part of the John Wimber movement in the States as well. For me they were pretty similar to a lot of what we'd done in churches before in terms of theology. They just had a slightly more lively music and they professed, miraculous spiritual gifts. So we were very much into words of knowledge, prophecy, tongues. We believed in healing, and that sort of thing. So at the time, it would have not required very much for me to believe a miracle had happened. I think if you have an a priori belief in miracles, you are wide open to believing pretty much anything somebody suggests is a miracle. So I was very much willing to take that on board, but I was always a little bit suspicious. It never sat quite right. I was always a little bit skeptical, and I think looking back, I can see most of it was coincidence, a certain way of framing things. And what really kind of shook me was when I thought we were the only ones who did have miracles, and everybody else's religion was pretty dead, and there was no sort of supernatural things happening there. Or if they were, they would have been from the devil. So that was pretty easy to write off. But with the advent of the internet, we can obviously look at the other faith claims and Hindus and Islam and all religions sort of stating that they have miracle claims, and people suggest that their deity has intervened. So that was a bit of an eye-opener, and from then on it went downhill. So and now I am I suppose agnostic would be a fairly kind way to put it. As I say, 90%, 95% of miracles I hear about, I think you can probably explain. But I do accept there are a few things in life that we don't know what the answer is to that. We can't explain how it's happened. They are highly unusual. They do seem to suspend the laws of the natural world. So yeah, fine. It wouldn't really change my view too much either way now if there was a miracle to be sort of proved one way or the other. So I would just put it down to one of those things we don't necessarily understand. Whereas you'd asked me 10 years ago, it would have been easy to explain, and it was all part of God's plan. But I'm no longer there, and that's probably me in a nutshell.
Okay, and Teddi.
Hi, everybody. Y'all may know from my comments, anybody that's read them, but I'm a criminal defense attorney. And in many ways, I too am a skeptic about many things. I don't just take a bunch of things on faith. I do require a lot of evidence. And so during the course of our conversation, some of the skeptics might find that I agree with a lot of the things that they are saying in having looked at David's position paper. There are many points that he makes that I agree with, but there are a number of points that he makes that I disagree with, and we'll, be discussing those things. I think that in being an attorney, a lot of times I view things in terms of the evidence, and I view things in terms of whether there is either a preponderance of the evidence or proof beyond reasonable doubt. And so that's how I view the world. That's how I make decisions about what to believe, what not to believe. And I think in terms of the word miracle, I think that that's a word that is very overused and misused, and things that are being described as a miracle might be better described as providence, or just, coincidence, or just something good that has happened. So I have a different standard of miracle, possibly, than some of the other folks on here. So we'll see how everything pans out in terms of our definitions. But I was brought up in the Greek Orthodox Church, and I would consider it pretty mainstream. There's no talk of, hellfire and brimstone, no speaking in tongues, no faith healers, nothing oppressive, nothing to make someone feel or get a bad taste in their mouth about God or religion. There was a lot of positivity. There were rules that are naturally associated with religion and God, but there was never a sense that it was oppressive. It was the same way as what atheists would talk about ethics, and ethics are about rules as well. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of miracles. When I was around 16 or 17 years old, I first became aware of the Shroud of Turin. And I consider that to be a miracle. I think of miracles as being very rare. And that is what I consider a miracle. So anyway, let's get back to David, but that's just a little bit about what my thoughts are.
Okay, very good. So I am going to start where I suspect I'm going to end, but we'll see how it goes. So before I give you just a few minutes of that, I want to read something. By any measure, the milk miracle, which began September 21st, 1995, was an unusual religious event. The experience cut across the entire social strata, the most simple of people to the most educated of doctors, lawyers, and engineers. The most ardent and consistent worshippers had the experience, as did those for whom religion meant little and God was a dim concept. Christians, Muslims, Sikhs, and atheists shared in having their offerings accepted by the Lord Ganesha, who even obliged TV news cameras with live coverage in many countries. In Sanskrit, the milk miracle would be called, and I'm sorry, my Sanskrit is bad, can't pronounce that. All observed the miracle in speechless wonder. It was like the union with God, said one engineer. This was not the result of any mere humans entreating.
I watched that this week. It was amazing. It's the Hindu milk miracle. Yeah.
Yes.
1995. It happened.
1995.
Yeah.
It happened, and it's repeatable. You could probably perform it today.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I want to go try it.
I was looking for a statue around the house. I haven't got any Ganesh statues, but I was thinking another one might work.
I'm low on Ganesh.
Yeah.
But for those of you who are not familiar with the milk miracle, what it is, a man, a worshiper, was praying one day, September 1995, and he made a milk offering to his god Ganesh in the form of an elephant statue. And he offered the milk to one of the statue's tusks, and to his amazement, the statue drank it. And talk of a miracle started to spread. But it didn't end there. It didn't become some kind of legend. It was repeated. People picked it up, and they started offering milk offerings to their statue of Ganesha's. And lo and behold, their statues were drinking their milk. Now, apparently this wasn't happening before 1995. Go figure. Don't know. Can't tell you anything about the significance of that date. But this started happening, and it kind of moved up the chain. So the churches started reproducing this miracle in their churches with their big statues that had been there for years and years. And they would put the milk up to the statue, and the statue in front of everyone would drink it. They invited the news. The news would come in. They would put their cameras there. And the trick would be done right there. People could examine them. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, atheists, everybody, they saw this. This happened. It happens. Now, are there explanations? Sure. But no one's been able to actually prove that this is not a miracle. Honestly, this is a freaking miracle if you're going to talk about miracles. What?
Check out the footage. It is really impressive. I did. There's just literally this little tusk is like slurping up teaspoons of milk. Yeah, and it's because this guy who you say was he had some sort of dream that Ganesh wanted milk and was really, really wanted some milk. So he tried it. It worked, and then they phoned the big Delhi temple, and the big Delhi temple started, asking everyone else. That's how it got diffused quite quickly and started happening everywhere. It's not really this kind of a wave going through the country like they might want to frame it as. It was literally kind of a top-down call to all the other temples and then all the local ones to say, is this happening as well? So they all had to go, and sure enough, it happened. You have to kind of suspend your skeptical criticism when you look at the statue that is actually covered in milk, and there's milk all around it as well that's pouring off. You just have to just look at the spoon. The spoon is going in, that's for sure, but don't worry about the milk that is running off the table.
So we might talk about a little bit of how this is done.
Okay, look, right here, can you, I don't know if you folks can hear that little jangle on the mic. I am holding in my hand, I've been on mute for a few minutes now, and I'm holding in my hand a small elephant. I happen to have it because it was given to me as a Christmas gift a couple of years ago, and it stays in my little bowl of knickknacks, the place that I put my car keys and that kind of thing. And I also have a glass of milk sitting here on my counter, and I've got just as much milk in my glass now as when I picked up the elephant. So maybe I've got the wrong kind of elephant. Do I need to dedicate this little elephant to Ganesh?
It needs to be a Ganesh. It's like
okay, Ganesh. I offer this elephant.
Every fat man statue is not a Buddha. Okay.
No, sure. Ganesh, I offer this elephant to you now, and I ask that you sanctify this elephant in your name.
That's not how it's done. I don't think you're taking this seriously.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, come on now. When we're looking at miracles, first of all, David, you just basically brought up some allegation, right? A report. Now, I'd like to know who wrote this.
It's on video.
Who did they interview?
It's on everybody. It's on video. They've interviewed everybody. You can see lots of examples of it. It's not
there are
hidden.
people talking about aliens in that same respect.
Wow, you sound like you're being
this
really
footage.
skeptical.
Yeah,
I mean,
I told you
them
I
think
am
they can fly into the
skeptical.
clouds.
These are aliens. I'm telling you, this is not you can see it for yourself. It's probably repeatable. Now, let me just for the audience.
Wait a minute. Now, if it is repeatable,
it's been repeated many times in many places. On film.
It is repeatable in the way that we do with science, and that becomes natural law, right? That's by definition not a miracle.
No, not at all, because Ganesh is thirsty. Ganesh be thirsty. Now, at some point, Ganesh is going to stop drinking. He didn't start drinking until 1995. Why didn't we hear reports of this before then? There were Ganesh statues. There have been Ganesh statues since forever.
But
so
I can make
in
that claim
1995,
that there are,
Ganesh got thirsty, told a person that he wanted milk, and he has been showing this sign to people in a way that people can see it, repeat it, and believe it. How is that not a miracle?
Well, I'd like to have some people that I find credible to go and examine this Ganesh statue.
So despite all of the people
it was in the New York Times, it was on the BBC News. Everybody reported it. It was quite a big thing in 1995. It went around the world in terms of news.
I'd never heard of the Ganesh thing.
Oh, well, you may have been in a Christian church at a time because they talk about it.
Do we all get that same? Privilege that we can just say of miracles? I want this to be investigated by people that I find credible. Do you think that that's an okay statement for all of us to raise in regard to any miracle? Is it okay if we all say, I want to find people that I find credible? to examine the evidence?
Well, look, it's up
No,
to every...
hold on. That's a yes or no question. Is it yes or is it no? It's okay for any of us to ask the same question that you asked. I want to be able to bring. Okay.
Yes, it is.
So
And the reason...
before you go on, I would just like to say that was just the opening of my opening statement. So I'm going to get back to my opening statement.
Can I just explain
No,
why? That
no, you cannot. You may explain why later. Hold your thought. And whoever the mouth breather is, back away from your microphone. And coming from me, I have more bad breath noises on my microphone. Anyway, let me just set Ganesh aside for a moment. Though I swear before the week is over, I am going to have a genuine Ganesh statue. This, I must do this. So at any rate, I just wanted to open with that particular story because for many people around the world, that is their shroud. It is their thing that they can point to and say, oh yes, this is real. And it validates everything that they believe about their God and their religion. It certainly ticks the box of unusual. It ticks the box of, happening within a religious context. And as I've been told by some of the brightest Christians of all, it doesn't even have to be, quote unquote, supernatural. It could be a matter of timing within a religious context that this unusual event occurred. It ticks these boxes. And for millions of people, it is a verified, bona fide, honest-to-goodness miracle that I know of zero Christians who give a tinker's damn about. And so I want to take up the mantle of the Christian with regard to other people's miracles and start off by saying three things. I am unimpressed. I am unconvinced. And I am uninterested. So first of all, I'm unimpressed. It's not a matter of whether there is a naturalistic explanation or not. I'm willing to accept the Hindu belief. And by the way, this has been examined by smart Hindus, okay? Not by well-educated, accomplished Hindus, not just peasants. So put your third world biases aside there for a moment. Let's just accept it as miracle, a Ganesh miracle. I'm still unimpressed. Don't care. If the best thing this Ganesh can do is make some statues slurp up milk, considering all of the problems in the world, especially the Hindu world, considering all that they go through, this God, this mighty, practically all-powerful God, the best he can do is have some statues drink up milk. By the way, shouldn't there be children drinking that milk? Honestly, the statue should be producing milk, not drinking milk. I am unimpressed by what this God seems to be accomplishing in the world. I am unconvinced. So yeah, I know there are, there's video and there are people who believe and they invite the press in to see it and it's not held behind some piece of glass in some secret monastery. No, they let their miracles out to be examined. And this is one of the things I like about Hindus because they tend to do this. Other Hindu miracles very similar. Come and look. Yeah, it's an actual miracle. It's one of the things that sets them apart from Christian miracles. And still I'm unconvinced. Because I do know of some naturalistic explanations for this event. Now, it doesn't matter. I can talk about it or I can not talk about it. It has.
You do know of naturalistic explanations?
I do. It has no relevance, though. Because I can give you naturalistic explanations for every Christian claimed miracle. So it doesn't actually matter whether we can come up with some possible naturalistic explanations or not.
Well, I think it does.
But I tend to define miracle in the way that Teddy is hinting at here, which is the idea that it could not happen by nature. Now, most of the people that I argue with lately don't define it that way. But I think that if there is a naturalistic explanation, you can't go to the category of miracle. And even if you don't have an explanation, that just means you don't have an explanation yet. You have not eliminated the naturalistic explanation. And so there's nothing about this Ganesh miracle, or any other Christian miracle for that matter, that causes me to eliminate all potential naturalistic explanations. So I am unconvinced by this actually being an act of a particular god. And for all I know, this could be the act of a different Hindu god. There are like 330 million Hindu gods. I'm sure some of them are at war with each other. And so it could be that, one of the gods is trying to make Ganesh look silly by drinking milk instead of doing something decent. And at some point, some Hindu is going to ultimately ask the question, why isn't this God giving us starving kids milk instead of drinking our starving kids milk? Maybe it's a rivalry type thing. Don't know. Not convinced. But finally, beyond being unconvinced and whatever the first thing is I said, I am also uninterested. It simply doesn't matter to me. I don't care if this is the opening statement. I don't care if this was a legitimate miracle from a legitimate God. I know that sounds like a very strange, overly skeptical thing to say. But I just grant you that Ganesh is real and can do this. It doesn't matter. I have lived my life almost 50 years now without knowing about this and without caring about it. And it does not change the price of milk, which in my case is about $6 a gallon for the milk that I drink. I still have to live my life and find a way to make another $6 so I can buy another gallon of milk. I have to make another, $1,500, thereabouts to find a way to pay my mortgage. I've got to make another series of money to go see doctors and pay my doctor's bills. And I go through these processes in my life, and whether Ganesh drank up some milk or not is just irrelevant to me. It's irrelevant. It doesn't change one factor in my life. And Teddy on this panel has gone through her life not even knowing about this event. I had actually heard of it before, but I didn't really look into it until recently. She's gone through her life not knowing about this event. Probably some of the other panelists have gone through their lives not knowing about this event. And it doesn't matter to them. They're completely uninterested. They're uninterested before this podcast. They'll be uninterested after this podcast. It won't matter. And so I put these three things out there for you and say that they are just as applicable to Christian miracles. Now, I'm just taking the part of the Christian as they look at the Hindu miracle, but I invite everyone else to take this part too, because I think it's pretty reasonable. It's okay to be unimpressed, unconvinced, and uninterested, because that is exactly the position the Christian takes with regard to other miracles. And with that, I think perhaps some conversation should begin. So before opening the floodgates, sit on it. I know you're all fit to burst. We got it. Give that person some milk. I want to go through one more round of boring speeches, but it's important. And so this round, take up to 2 minutes, and give me your definition of miracle, because we've got 5 people on the panel, and we probably have 5 different definitions of what we're talking about. And so I'm going to start us off this time. People have heard my definition before, but just in case it's the first time you're tuning in, welcome. My definition of miracle is something that would be magic. And I guess you could say magic with a religious connotation, but it's still magic. It's something that simply cannot happen, not merely something that cannot be explained, but something that cannot happen in the natural world. And so if you understand the set of all possibilities in the natural world, and then something happens outside of that, then that would be magic or a miracle, especially in the context of religion. Andrew, what's a miracle?
Okay. First of all, I got to say, I think you're pretty hard on Ganesh. I'll answer about miracles in just a second, but it's pretty clear to me that Ganesh cares about elephants with osteoporosis, and that's the answer here. And I think it's overly skeptical of you not to spot the reason that some god could care about creatures other than humans. Elephants get osteoporosis too, and they need milk. Okay. Now, I've done my part for Ganesh.
And yet, I seriously doubt we're done with Ganesh today.
Probably not. Okay. What is a miracle? First of all, it probably doesn't matter overly much among all of us what I think a miracle is. What would, if we were going to discuss a miracle, what I would actually do as a reasonable person is say, tell me what your definition is and why you think you've seen one. And then we can talk about whatever it is that you think was a miracle. And I wouldn't even have to start with my definition. We could have a reasonable conversation about miracles, adopting any definition and talking about where we think we might have seen a thing that fits that definition. But to be honest to the question, I viewed a miracle when I was a Christian, and it's been a long time. But I viewed a miracle as that thing.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt just a half a second. Andrew, due to personal reasons, I'm going to turn the program over to you for the next few minutes. And so as everyone gives their definitions, I'm going to leave it to you to do the next thing if I am not back.
Okay, sure.
Carry on.
No problem. Glad to do it. Okay. So just to finish that thought up then, a miracle was that thing that broke the laws of nature and did so in the context of the Christian God providing the necessary motivating force to break physical law and accomplish some end, whether that end was to help a parishioner or to demonstrate that the Christian God existed or whatever it was that thing that broke natural law and did so based on the power of Jehovah God. So, Matthew.
Hello, I'm very similar to what you and David already said. For me, a miracle needs to be something that we can confirm can't happen via any known natural, or it doesn't even have to be a known natural means, but something that we can confirm can't be done naturally by any other explanation. That doesn't mean that means that something that we can't currently explain doesn't count. It has to be something that we can confidently say that there is no natural means by which it could possibly happen, whether we know that method or not. So, for example, rolling 24 double sixes doesn't count as a miracle, even though it's got a really very, very low probability of happening. We can explain that could potentially happen naturally.
Okay. Teddy, I'm going to leave you to last, and the reason is that I want your definition of miracle to last longest in the listeners' minds. You're the only Christian on the panel. You ought to get the last word when we're doing these sort of definitional things. Sarah?
Yeah, so I would say you guys are just children of the post-Enlightenment because a miracle was, I've read, was actually more a vehicle to communicate myth, in which case that alleviates a lot of the problem. Going back to the Ganesh story, what was quite interesting that I discovered about the Hindus is that they have a miracle for them is just something wonderful. It's just there's no need to explain it. You don't have to have any theology around it. It's just something wonderful. It's only recently, since Hume and sort of the post-Enlightenment and the print age, where we started realizing that the world was knowable, and it's no longer, miracles weren't things that explained a difficult world, but they needed now to be evidence-based and violations of nature and things like that. So I'd say your views are actually more a product of our modern times, if you call the 1700s a modern time. But in the past, miracles were for the Jews about, maybe for them it was a bit more about drama and the proof of existence of a higher power, and the power of this deity and control. And also in the New Testament, even though the word apparently isn't used, it's more wonders and signs that are used rather than the word miracle. I think in the OT it's only used a couple of times. So this word is actually quite a modern invention, and it was all about wonder, seeing something wonderful. So I think today we use it in a kind of really loose definition often. When a doctor says, cool, that's a miracle, what they mean is something outside the bell curve, something a bit unusual, maybe unlikely, or something they've never seen before. But so I think we all know when we say, oh, this is a miracle, but when we're talking about really hard evidence, miracle in the Hume sense of the word, then we are talking about maybe laws of the natural world being suspended. So I think each time you do almost have to define it, each time you speak of it, I suppose. That's what my feeling is on it.
Nicely said. And excuse me. So Teddi, I think that brings us around to you.
All right. Well, I pretty much agree mostly with David, you, and Matthew, and largely with Sarah, more with Sarah towards the end of what her definition is. But I would define a miracle as an act of God, which is good, and which temporarily overpowers the law of nature, and that there's a religious context that surrounds it so as to distinguish it from some sort of, phenomena or and so, because we have to have something to distinguish it from just something just being atypical. And I think that the point of a miracle is to give us a signal that God exists, or to tell us something about something that God is trying to communicate to us. So I do think that miracles probably tend to be pretty rare, true miracles. I think the word is very overused. So I require a lot of hard evidence for miracles, and in terms of establishing a miracle, I'm going to go with what David Hume, atheist David Hume, says, and he had, and I will add or expand upon his definition a little bit, because he referred to just testimony in terms of evidence for a miracle, but there can be more than testimony. For example, the Shroud of Turin, we have physical evidence that can be examined with that. So I like the standard that Hume says, with the addition of just evidence in general, but he said, no testimony is sufficient to establish a miracle unless the testimony be of such a kind that its falsehood would be more miraculous than the fact which it endeavors to establish. So we would have to think that, whatever the miracle is, for example, with the Shroud of Turin, the explanations that people try to give for how it was created are so preposterous that trying to believe, for example, the popular thing that is brought up with the Shroud of Turin is that some medieval forger created it. Well, all of the things that this, medieval forger would have to do, that would be miraculous. And it is, if you take Occam's razor, it's just more reasonable to think that this is, that the shroud is Jesus's burial cloth, because of all of the scientific evidence that supports it.
So I'm going
and
to
that
actually
makes
give
more
you.
sense.
I'm going to cut you off here because I'm going to give you a chance to go in more detail on the Shroud a little bit later. So keep some of your powder dry for that. We will do something that I dread, which is either tackle the Shroud or just let you babble on about it for a while. Either way, it makes my eyes bleed. But I know that the Shroud is important. I understand why it's important. But I'm just definitionally speaking, though, it sounds like you are in broad agreement that a miracle does need to be something other than that which can be called nature.
Yes, I am.
Okay, and Sarah, if I heard you correctly, your definition of miracle does include broadly things that can be called nature, just wondrous in the way that nature is wondrous and awesome sometimes.
I think that's the way that it was viewed. I'm not sure if it's the sort of way we use the word today, but I would say
how do you use it?
How do I use it? Yeah, I mean, I think we're all guilty of using it, and that was a miracle. I made the bus. I got there on time when everything was set against me. Something unusual, but in terms of a Christian religious sense, it was something that I would have known was from God. I can't then define it beyond that because he would have had to give me that knowledge that it was from him as well at that time. So if there was providence, something was provided that was, really timely. If I'd had real certainty it was from God, I could have called it a miracle. So
okay, so you used a word there that I was hoping to bring Teddi in on, providence. Teddi, earlier on, you talked about providence.
Yes.
I know that my ilk used to talk about providence a lot because we didn't believe in overt miracles, but we did believe in providence. So that said, how would you differentiate providence from a miracle? Just hearing Sarah speak just now, it's almost as if she was saying, and Sarah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that a miracle is something that was from God specifically, a specific event, whereas providence is maybe God working in the background, but you don't actually have any direct knowledge that God did it. Kind of a hidden miracle, if you will.
Was that to Sarah or to me?
Well, so Sarah, first of all, is that kind of how you were talking about providence just now?
I was saying for it to be called a miracle, for something to have spoken to your kind of faith, I would have had to really know it was from God, not just good things happening, because that would have seemed a bit loose.
So what's
However,
providence?
I can see. When some things come together that are really timely, and you've got that sense that it was from God, that you feel it wouldn't have happened otherwise. But how you prove that, I don't know. And I'm talking with my ex-Christian hat on, sort of thing. That's what I would have thought. So yeah, you could give. It's when you count the hits a lot of the time. Then you often say, yeah, God did this, or He led me to the right house or to the right job, or that kind of thing. It was very easy to rationalize it after the event and call it a miracle, but I wouldn't use the word like that now for something like that, so banal, as it were, because these things happen to non-Christians as well. So
Teddi, do you have a hard definition between miracle and providence?
I do, and I distinguish providence in that I think it's when God is intervening with things in our life in a natural way. And so I'm going to say that providence, that's more of something that believers are going to have an appreciation for. The skeptic, the atheist, and possibly the agnostic won't have an appreciation for that, because by definition, if it's occurring in a natural way, how are you going to be certain or have a good amount of certainty that that's something that God is doing as opposed to just a coincidence? But again, for the Christian, the religious context of it is probably what will guide a Christian into thinking that providence has occurred, in the sense that, for example, if one prays for something very hard and then the next day or soon after, something that's pretty unusual happens that's an answer to the prayer, then a Christian would have a good amount of certainty, at least in their own mind, in their own belief system, that perhaps that was God granting a prayer for them. And there will probably, in certain Christians like me, you might not be 100% certain whether or not that was a prayer that was answered, but you might have a pretty good idea about it, and that could be a pretty awesome feeling if one thinks that one's prayer has been answered. But, that's never going to pass muster for a skeptic.
So here's where I want to open the floodgates of discussion a little bit for the first time. A little bit. So as we're trying to define this and get this narrowed down a little bit, we've got two terms. We've got miracle and we've got providence. I will just go ahead and say the controversial thing. I don't believe in providence at all. I believe it's a cheat. In fact, I started believing this late in my Christian walk. I think that providence is a weasel word. It's a way for Christians to talk about acts of God that they know they can't prove. And they can just kind of keep God in the game and give God credit for things. It's a way for them to do it kind of dishonestly. But here's the thing. If God did it, and it wouldn't have happened without God, I don't care whether you can see the trick done or not. It's a miracle. So you either believe that they're miracles or that they're not miracles. And when we start mealy-mouthing about providence, then I think the game is up. But where I want to open the conversation here is, so how are we supposed to tell what a miracle looks like? And, whether we see something and a Christian calls it a miracle, is there any criteria where we can say, oh, no, that's not a miracle, that's just providence? Or how do you even identify what we're talking about with a miracle? So we've all kind of defined it a little bit, and we've talked about the natural versus the not natural. But it's all kind of meaningless if we can't all equally look at an event and say that's a miracle and that's not a miracle. And so without calling on anyone particularly, let's just see where the conversation goes here. Anyone want to jump in and tell me how I'm supposed to identify one of these things?
Before we do, I have a question about prayer. If Teddi doesn't mind a direct question.
Sure.
Okay. So I was taught about prayer, and this was done by the way in a university level theology class. Would you agree that that God can answer every prayer in one of three ways? To affirmatively answer the prayer, to say yes to the exact thing that you were requesting, to also not answer the prayer by saying no, by not giving you the thing that you asked for directly, or by suspending the answer to that prayer and letting you have the thing that you specifically requested somehow later on. So to shorten those, it's God answers every prayer. The three answers are yes, no, and wait a while.
Well, what we as humans would consider a prayer answered is getting what we want. Now, I'm sure all have heard the expression that God has his own plan, and just because we want something doesn't mean that God is going to give it to us.
Right. So those would be no's. To
right.
be clear, that would be a no.
I don't view. I know a lot of Christians will talk about, ask and you shall receive, and I've always had a problem with thinking like that, because God is not a wishing well that you throw your penny into. God is not the genie and I'm Aladdin and I have a lamp. That would make me God if I can just ask God anything and that God gives me what I want. Then I'm the God and he's my slave. So I don't view that that prayer works in that way. And so I can ask all I want for God to give me $1 million. That doesn't mean that God's going to give it to me. And so if God doesn't,
right, that would be a no.
I
would be God saying no.
Yeah, and I would see that as, well, my prayer has not been answered, or my prayer has not been granted. Perhaps that's the better word for it. He may answer it, and the answer may be no.
So we've got a situation here where we're saying God does answer prayers. No.
Right.
Does God ever, in your view, answer prayers? Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Does God ever, in your view, answer, you need to wait a while?
I'm sure he does, because
okay.
Those would kind of be his choices when he's deciding whether to grant a prayer, like maybe not right now, just like every parent with their child, hey, I want this toy. No, yes, or, maybe at Christmas.
So here's the problem. In a probabilistic way, what you've done is exclude prayer from any supernatural possibility, because those are also the natural outcomes of the things that we want. That we get them, we don't get them, or we have to wait for them.
Well, that's why I refer to prayer as being, the granting of prayers as being providence, because it's in that natural realm. And so, as I mentioned earlier, that's never going to have the degree of compelling objective evidence that is going to persuade a skeptic. So that's why I said that's kind of for the enjoyment of believers. But when we're raising something to the level of miracle, then that is something that does need that objective type of evidence that needs to be scrutinized. Because for example, David with Ganesh was talking about how he just doesn't care about Ganesh, and even if it was a miracle. And I don't understand that kind of thinking, because if some God is able to do something like that, something that is supernatural, well, that to me, that's pretty attention grabbing, and I might want to know more about it, because perhaps there are repercussions to not falling in line and being a believer in that. Okay,
so let me just say the last paragraph that I have to say, because David does need to move on, and I don't want to hog the mic. But
this is open conversation, so anyone else can
well,
jump
Matthew
in.
and Sarah need to. Okay, good. So I want everybody else to jump in. This is going to be my last paragraph on this, because the show does need to move.
Don't you believe him?
Okay, I'm going to try. It's a mic, people. I have an addiction. It's a thing. Mic's anonymous. So here's my hopefully last paragraph, so that Matthew and Sarah can jump in with you. I think you're wrong to shift the topic to miracles. I think that it is easily as convincing if the Christian could prove providence, that God somehow answers prayer, and that does a Christian good in a way that it doesn't do for atheists and skeptics. Christians get more of what they want because they have a God on the supernatural backbone, and they can wind the gears of the universe through this prayer time. Then that is every bit as important a part of the Christian story as Jesus turning water to wine. the thing that you can't do, and the thing that I think, by the you there, that's editorial, not you, Teddy, but you, the Christian. The thing that isn't done is the ability to separate providence from nature. So on that basis, I find it utter nonsense.
That would be exactly my point as well. How do you tell the difference between something that happened as a sheer coincidence or good fortune and something that happened as a direct hand of God, whether or not as a direct response to prayer? And if you can't tell the difference, then you can't call miracle.
Well, not only is it indistinguishable from praying that they're not being a god at all. I mean, no and maybe later, and even yes, can be still, it's indistinguishable from a god being in existence or not in existence, or for praying to a milk jug. I mean, you could be thinking that you've had a response from having prayed to a milk jug because something has or hasn't happened, or mostly probably hasn't happened, let's say. And then the other thing, you said something, Teddy, actually, which is quite interesting. You said, I can understand that Providence doesn't convince skeptics. I don't think it always convinces Christians. I mean, I had doubts when I was a Christian because I just thought these providence things were a little bit, well, exactly that. I couldn't distinguish them between God actually answering and not answering. If you just say yes, no, and maybe, it covers all the eventualities. So he's always answering, but is he really, practically speaking? So that was my issue.
I think it depends on what the odds are of the occurrence happening in terms of how convinced we can be if it was an act of God acting in a natural way. So miracles are, because they would be supernatural occurrences defying the laws of nature, that's kind of an easier call to make. But for example, with coincidences, if I run into my next door neighbor at the local grocery store, oh, wow, that's a coincidence. Now, if I run into my next door neighbor at the grocery store across town, that's even more of a coincidence. If I run into the neighbor out of state at a grocery store, wow, that's even more of a coincidence. If I run into that neighbor in a Russian grocery store in Russia, wow. And if I prayed to have that, right before seeing that neighbor, I was praying to God, asking to see my neighbor in the Russian grocery store. And lo and behold, there they are. Well, that is pretty odd-defying, even though it is not supernatural. But I mean, if you have something that odd-defying, especially in connection to some sort of a religious context, like a person just prayed for that. Now, granted, I don't know that God wastes his efforts doing miracles for silly reasons like that. But, let's pretend it was something more monumental, like,
winning the lottery.
Well, no, that's
well, a lot of people
greed,
would pray. It would get them out of a lot of difficult situations, and they might be genuinely praying to God to provide. And yet, it's an extremely rare event for one person, but it does actually happen. A very, very rare event is not a miracle. It's just a very, very rare event. I mean, somebody has to win the lottery that week, and
there's
I'm
another
quite a lot of
issue.
people pray for it.
Sure. But I don't know that. Perhaps one has to look at the nature of the prayer. People praying to win the lottery, maybe they're very desperate for money, but you don't need to win a lottery to have food on the table. So there's a distinction, and I don't know that God is really involving himself in giving people millions of dollars. That seems a bit in excess.
Yes.
What about the things that happen that are odds-defying that people don't pray for? So
I agree.
I bumped into a friend. This was bumped into a girl at the bottom of the what's that? Not the Twin Towers, but yeah, the Twin Towers are who's on my course in the UK. I mean, you do find somebody on the other side of the world that you know, or whatever. These things do happen.
I'm
Very
asking
rare
you to
events do happen.
distinguish. Right. How do you distinguish between those things that you said were providential because they were, and I'll quote you, odds defying, and those things that happen that nobody prays for that are still equally odds defying?
Well, and again, I had mentioned that with Providence, because if something is occurring in a natural way, you're not going to have it's not ever going to be quite as compelling as something that is supernatural. However, let's talk about how we live our lives on a daily basis. We are constantly making decisions, choices. For example, when we get in our car every day, we are taking a chance on getting killed in a car accident. Yet we still get in that car because we figure, the odds are pretty good that at least not today I'm not going to get killed in a car accident. And so we take that risk. Well, when it comes to the issue of miracles, in my opinion, the whole purpose of a miracle is to evidence the existence of God. And the importance of that is for us as a people to decide whether or not we should put our faith and trust in God and fall in with what He wants us to do in order to reap our reward in the afterlife. And so there is risk involved with believing in God, and there is risk involved with not believing in God. And the risk involved with believing in God is that if you want to honor God the best way that you can, if you want to perhaps reap the grandest of rewards in heaven, you're going to try really hard to live the way He wants us to. And that could mean not doing a lot of things that you want to do, a lot of things that God objects to. And so, one might not be, quote, living life to the fullest in terms of what they want to do if they believe in God. So there's a risk in, hey, if I'm wrong about God, then wow, I spent my whole life doing everything good and right and not doing the stuff I really wanted to do. But the beautiful thing about it is that, like with ethics, which in having communicated with many of the skeptics in the blog, all of the skeptics I've spoken with, including y'all talk about how y'all are big on maintaining a set of nice, beautiful ethics. So then that is even more perplexing to me, because if you're going to pretty much live in accordance with the rules that God wants you to live by, then what justifies taking the huge risk that you're wrong about God's existence and then having eternal consequences for that? Whereas, I can understand more the atheist that's going to live large in this world, and they're going to commit crimes to the best of their ability and not try to not get caught. And they're going to just do all sorts of, things that God doesn't like for us to do. Just living life to the hilt. I can at least understand that perspective in terms of, okay, they figure we've got one life to live. I'm going to just live it up. It's still knowing that there's still, they might be wrong about things, but at least they're going to, enjoy it while they've got it.
So before getting into Pascal's wager, which we might if we have time in the podcast, I don't want to lose sight of the question that is on the table at the moment, of identifying miracles, and you talk about the odds. So I'm not a mathematician, so I always get into trouble when I try to do math in public. But I'm going to go there because it seems like this is kind of where a lot of this rests for you. And so I'm going to bring up something called the law of large numbers, which is to say that when the numbers get big enough, mind-bogglingly large enough, things happen, probabilistically that maybe would not happen in smaller numbers. Someone put it this way: if you're 1 in a million, there's 7,000 people on Earth just like you. 7 billion is such a large number, and so 1 in a million doesn't really mean much when you're talking about a number that large. In other words, there should be 7,000 people just like you if you were only 1 in a million. And so when you talk about, well, that thing happening, it only has odds of 1 in a million, and it was within a religious context. So what it sounds like is at some point you're embracing the science and the math, but at a certain point you let that go and you start embracing something else. But if you're going to embrace the science and the math with the big numbers, with the easy numbers, the macro numbers that we can grasp, you've got to hang on to it for the law of large numbers too, when the probabilities get small. Because something happening in a 1 in a billion chance means that in a 1 in a billion events it should happen. And therefore it is neither miracle nor providence. What are the chances of you meeting that friend of yours in Russia after saying a prayer? I think the bigger chance is she is stalking you. You should get a restraining order, and either you or she is a Russian spy. But it could also happen.
What if I didn't tell anybody I was going to Russia?
It doesn't matter. It could also happen completely coincidentally, and we can say, "Man, that's a 1 in a billion chance." Great, it happened. That's a billion events happened that day. And so it sounds like if you're saying, yeah, but if something really of low probability happens, then I'm going to throw away the science and I'm going to grab onto religion. But when low probability things happen, it's still science. It's still nature. And so I don't understand this emotional impulse to then say, well, that's a low probability thing that happened. I know that it can happen, but I'm going to throw away all of that and go with supernatural now. And yeah, low probability is still nature. That's all that I'm saying. And I don't know why at some point you throw it away.
Right, and it's special pleads. Because I tried to point this out a few minutes ago, the only time Christians do it is when they prayed for the thing that's low probability. Otherwise, it's just ignored. It's counting the hits and ignoring the misses.
Yeah, but we're talking about providence and miracles where they need to occur in a religious context. Otherwise, it's a fluke, right?
Right, but a religious context doesn't take it out of the probabilistic universe. It doesn't,
right.
So just saying, oh, well, but I grabbed my rosary beads and prayed does not then remove the thing you're praying for out of the natural law of probabilities.
Right, but let's take this out of the academic realm and bring it back to real life.
We're already out of the academic realm.
But we have to remember this is real life. And when, if the Christian God exists, there is a penalty for not embracing him and Jesus. And so,
but if the Christian God exists, then he doesn't need providence to demonstrate himself to us.
Right, and before we get there, we have to kind of put a bow somehow on the conversation of how do we recognize his deeds, which is what we're trying to get at here. And what you're offering is, well, low probability events. Well, the world is full of low probability events. It has to be full of low probability events. So if what you're saying is that an act of God is any low probability event that has even remotely a religious gloss, then I can't go with you on that, because then every low probability event is a miracle. And as long as we have billions of people on Earth, the majority of them professing some kind of religious belief and practice, then it's fairly high probability that a low probability event will be of some religious nature. So I don't recognize any way to determine, and I am trying, by the way, I don't recognize out of anything that you're saying, and I'm trying to still man your argument, by the way, as best as I can to make it even better than what you're presenting. And I'm just having a hard time trying to find any way of distinguishing a low probability natural event from something that you would call a miracle. And so I don't even get to Pascal's wager yet, because I haven't seen an act of your God, or you haven't given me a way of determining an act of your God.
but no, remember, I am distinguishing providence from a miracle. So when we talk about miracles, we're talking about the laws of nature being overpowered. And that is a much stronger argument to, persuade a non-believer. That's why I said providence is more for the appreciation of the believers or the people that might be on the fence. And so that's just,
Okay, so let me
part of the
let
club.
me ask you a better question then. How do we know when the laws of nature have been overpowered?
Well, the laws of nature, we pretty much, I'm not, anything's possible. So, maybe there are some laws of nature that we're not aware of, but we are all pretty familiar with, what's a normal occurrence. If an apple started falling from a tree and then all of a sudden it starts going up to the sky and we don't see something underneath it that is causing it to go up to the sky. Well, that doesn't look very natural. It's defying the law.
Has anyone ever claimed to have seen that happen?
I'm sorry?
Has anyone ever claimed to have seen that happen?
I don't know. I've certainly never.
Then why are we discussing a hypothetical which has no relevance to any conversation?
Because I'm giving an example of if one were to see that is something that we would say, hey, that's not natural. And so if we were to see that happen,
but what the skeptic would say is that's unusual. We should investigate it.
Yeah.
Because what you've said is actually right. So I want to agree with you wholeheartedly. Where you say, we would look at that and say, wow, that's unusual. Mm-hmm. Yes, we absolutely would. And I agree with Matthew that we're discussing this completely hypothetical thing and we could be discussing some real world example. But let me just put a bow on that.
Something's not natural, and that was an example.
Right, but you haven't given an example of something that's not natural. You've given an example of something that's unexplained.
Right. What I would say to your example, in case you're wondering, is because I've seen a lot of YouTube videos. I've lost a lot of my life watching YouTube. I am ashamed to admit it. People can do things on videos that are very impressive, though. And I would say, well, we just didn't see the strings pulling it, and maybe it was attached to a weather balloon that was in the clouds, and so it looked like the apple was rising. Or we could say that, well, that was a perfectly shaped apple hot air balloon, and it was small, it was filled with helium, and it was rising. I mean, we can come up with all kinds of natural explanations for seeing an apple rise from the ground to the air.
Well, what if it's in your backyard and it's not somebody potentially manipulating a YouTube video?
What if it's in your head? What if it's in your head? Hallucinations are a real thing.
Of course they are.
So we can deal with those what ifs, but I think this is probably a good time to let Matthew's point stand and move to the next phase of the discussion, or at least add to the discussion. We don't have to let this go. Teddy, give us maybe one or two or three good examples of what you would consider a miracle today that we can talk about and maybe consider the possibilities. So I know the shroud is one of them, and if you want to take some time to talk about that right now, you can. But I would also like to, if you would, give more than one example, if you think there is more than one example of an actual miracle that we can examine and talk about.
All right. Well, my number one thing is the Shroud of Turin. I think that that evidences the miracle in terms of the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And the religious context of it was that Jesus had made a claim, a provable claim. He had said something to the effect of, if the temple was destroyed, meaning his body, that he would raise it in 3 days. And then lo and behold, and we have the shroud. And so the beauty of the Shroud of Turin is that it's not like somebody just saw a religious statue cry blood, or somebody has stigmata on their hands. It is something that we have, and that scientists, some of the top scientists in the world, have examined and studied, and it continues to be studied. So we have this physical thing that is here, not here, but in Turin, Italy. That it's not. So it's not something we have to wonder whether it exists or not. We have it. The question is just, is it what it purports to be?
So before letting everyone loose on that, I just had a couple of questions about that you could answer for me very briefly. Mm-hmm. How does the shroud purportedly prove the resurrection of Jesus exactly?
The way that it evidences the resurrection deals with the bloodstain evidence.
Right. But I get that there's bloodstains. I get that there's an image. So let's take all of that as given. How does that prove resurrection?
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm getting to that.
Okay.
So among the bloodstain evidence, they are comprised of, almost all of them are blood clots, mm-hmm. not liquid blood. And these blood clots, when they have examined them microscopically, the edges, the perimeter, there are these raised crusts on them. Mm-hmm. And all of these crusts are undisturbed. They're pristine. Mm-hmm. And so that is what is unnatural, because, okay, so we have a shroud.
I'm not asking what's unnatural. Having an image on a shroud seems unnatural to me. So I'm not asking if it's unnatural.
Somebody could paint it.
I'm not asking any of that. I just want you to follow the question. Assume the shroud is exactly what you say it is. How does that demonstrate resurrection?
Well, I was getting to that.
Okay.
So when you have, let me give you an example. Let's say you have a cut on your hand and there's blood, mm-hmm. and then you slap a bandage on it.
Okay.
Later on, when you go to pull that bandage off, what happens? Some of that blood is going to be on the bandage. You're going to disturb the blood because the blood has kind of seeped into the bandage. And when you lift up the bandage, that's going to disturb the blood clot. So with the blood stains on the shroud, those are almost all blood clots. You have this piece of linen that was laid over the body. Mm-hmm. And so right now in Turin, we have the piece of linen, but obviously, unlike a mummy, there's no body in there. Right. So either the body had to be separated from the linen cloth, mm-hmm. or the linen cloth has to be a forgery.
No.
Right?
Well, yes, so the body could be separated from the linen by grave robbers robbing the linen, right?
Well, yes, but if that were if mm-hmm. that were the case, you would see among all of these blood clots, you would see that they were disturbed by the pulling off of the linen from the body. That would disturb the blood evidence, the clots.
Well, wouldn't that
especially
be true whether
the
body was dead or alive?
Pardon?
Wouldn't that be true whether the body was dead or alive?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't see how that's evidence for anything.
Well, no, but there's no body in. Right now, there's a shroud, right. But there's no body there. So, how do you have pristine perimeters on all of these blood clots, yet there's not a body still attached to it?
Right. So, someone carefully removed the shroud. There's some miraculous blood clots, but how does that show that he raised? Because if he just follow me, if he rose and he took the linen off himself, he'd still be pulling the blood clots off. So you'd still have to explain that.
No, well, that's where the miracle is. Because how in the world do you get a whole linen cloth when you've got tons of blood clots all over you? How do you remove that? And all of those perimeters remain pristine.
I don't know.
That's
you tell me.
Miracle.
However it would happen. So it sounds like there are two miracles then. There's the miracle of the resurrection, which we still haven't proved. The miracle of a cloth being removed from a body with clots on it, but there's no.
That's what evidence
pieces.
Is. That's what evidences the resurrection. And
how does that evidence the resurrection?
Because how else are you going to remove all of that linen from those blood clots without disrupting those perimeters?
But you would.
We don't even know if it's human blood, do we? I mean, I think we had a conversation on the board, and you said it's not.
Look,
it's not been proved. It's
before unleashing the herd on this. This is for my own edification because I wanted to ask this for a while.
Sure.
I get what you're saying. I think, but that does not speak to resurrection for me. So
it could be little tiny rodents that they just laid the cloth onto, and then the little rodents. I don't know.
I don't even care how the blood got there. It just seems to me that let's say it's me, and I rose, and I find myself wrapped up in some linen, and I got some bloody parts on me that the linen is stuck to, and I take the linen off of me. What is the condition of that linen going to look like?
Well, it's going to look like that, but you're not going to have an image on there, and you're not going to have the perimeters of all of those blood clots intact. They're going to be disturbed. Maybe a couple of them will be intact.
Okay,
probably none of them.
So what I'm
will
saying
be
is,
intact.
if you can imagine a person rising from the dead, and their linen would not look like the Shroud of Turin, why do you think that what the Shroud of Turin looks like suggests resurrection? I don't make a connection to that with resurrection. So let me give you another possibility.
Because David? People have been studying.
On. What if these things happened when Jesus died? So, for instance, just trying to give the story as much credence as possible. I've thought about this quite a bit. So during the death of Jesus, some weird things happened in the world, right? We had a strange eclipse. We had the temple curtain rending, and we had people coming out of graves. So let's just say that there's some weird radiation going on in the world at the time of his death. These things didn't happen when he rose. Let's be clear. These things happened when he died. And so it could be, from a theological perspective, that all of these images and weird things on the linen happened when he died. It would not indicate his resurrection at all. It would simply indicate his death.
I'd have to disagree with you there.
Then make the connection. I'm going to give you another chance here. Connect the dots between the linen and resurrection.
The connection is that it's not like I can tell you what the resurrection process is, okay? But however it occurred...
We got 10 resurrections in the Bible. We don't have any shrouds with this kind of indication. So I actually think we can say something about the resurrection process from a theological perspective, and it doesn't include this.
Well, with Lazarus, that was Jesus doing it, and that wasn't necessarily for where God was trying to...
Where's his shroud?
Well, God only figured he needed to show one piece of evidence for the main person, Jesus.
Well, he had 10
God
resurrections.
isn't showing the shroud.
What?
The shroud wasn't even a first century thing. Where were the... If there was a shroud when Jesus rose, why didn't that make it into the Bible?
Well...
Look, God has left this shroud in the possession of the largest collection of child abusers in human history, and they keep it hidden in a hole.
No, God didn't leave it to the Pope.
Who has it now?
The Pope is the sitting Pope is the owner.
Right.
But
okay. And if God wanted it to providentially belong to someone else, it could, right? I mean,
God didn't give it to him.
Well, wait a minute. When did the shroud show up? Because it should have shown up at the tomb when the women went to see Jesus. There's no mention of a magic shroud there. I think they would have noticed. I think they would have mentioned it to the apostles. I think they would have said, "See here, here's the shroud."
The Bible does reference cloths being there.
Well, it doesn't reference magic cloths being there. So I am still at a loss.
It doesn't need to because the magic cloth is still with us.
Well, no, there's a mundane cloth in the Bible and a magic cloth today, and you still haven't connected the dots between the cloth and resurrection. So
yes, I'm going to want to listen.
I'm going to give you one more chance. Then I'm going to give you one more chance, and I will not interrupt you, and then I will unleash the horde. But I wanted to have this conversation for a little bit because you need to understand why people don't give a damn about the shroud. Beyond that, and after everyone has had their bite, and if there's anything left of you, please, people, leave something left of her. I want to know what other miracles you've got in your bag, because the shroud isn't getting it for me, and you're not really selling it. But take another stab anyway of telling me how you connect shroud with resurrection.
To buy it.
Okay, so tell me how shroud proves resurrection. Make that simple connection for me.
Again.
Okay.
People have had, and you know what, David? You yourself can do experiments to get a bunch of blood, as have other folks, and try it out for yourselves. Mm-hmm. Put a bunch of blood clots somewhere. Mm-hmm. Put some linen on it. Then lift the linen up and see if you can get all of those blood clots to have perfectly intact perimeters.
Great. I can't.
I
can't. How does that prove resurrection?
Because something supernatural occurred to where the body, we're only surmising the body either disappeared, somehow got out of the cloth, but still left those perimeters intact. That's where there's something supernatural that has been left for us, for scientists.
But why is the supernatural
to
thing
examine.
resurrection?
Because a body got out. Also,
bodies get out all the time. The supernatural thing could have happened before the grave was robbed.
Okay.
Why
yes,
does it point to resurrection?
The other beautiful thing about the cloth is that it evidences rigor mortis, which of course would mean somebody's dead. Mm-hmm. In the Bible, where they talk about when the guards used the spear to check to see if Jesus was dead, the Bible talks about how blood and water came out of that wound.
You keep proving Jesus is dead.
And
how does this prove resurrection?
Again, the crusts, the intact crust. That's what takes you. That also evidences. I'm
just going to cut it off there.
No body.
I'm not biologist enough to understand how crust equals resurrection, but I do open the floodgates to everyone else to ask their questions because
there's
and you should know
there.
that Teddi here is not just some random Shroud enthusiast. She knows a thing or two about her Shroud, and so if you, like me, have some questions about this, hit her up. Go.
It's pretty simple for me. Why didn't God, if he's going to leave us this evidence, why didn't he make the blood samples detectable as being human or not? Because I don't even think we know whether it's genuinely human blood or not. Is that right?
Yes, you are right. At one point, they thought, what our understanding is that it was human blood, but now science has become a little bit more sophisticated, and they're starting, I believe the term is cross-reactivity. So now, the science says that it is real blood.
The science says we're not even sure.
No, we're sure that it's...
No, don't go there. We're not sure.
I'm going there.
Then flat out you're lying, because that's not what science says. No, the science is not certain. You won't get past
Matthew,
that.
Even if it's not certain, why not make it certain?
If
you're going to go to all the trouble of leaving the shroud, make the evidence good.
Let's be sure, Matthew. Let's be sure that we're talking about the same thing, because we might be disagreeing where there's no disagreement. Are you saying that there's still uncertainty in terms of what is provable, that it's blood or human blood?
That it's blood at all.
Okay, well...
If the science knows that it's blood, A, we'd be able to know what mammal it came from, and B, if it's human, we'd be able to know what blood type it is. Can you answer those two questions? Can you even tell me what blood type it is?
Okay, I can answer your questions.
What blood type is it?
They used to think they knew the blood type, AB.
Yeah.
But now with advanced scientific knowledge, they realize that additional tests would have to be done in order to ascertain that. Dr. Kelly Kearse was a big, has written a number of articles talking about how with our advanced knowledge about cross-reactivity, we can no longer, whereas we once thought that it was primate blood, there are articles that have been written about the Shroud where some people say it's human blood. The Shroud of Turin research project, the STURP team, they never said it was human blood. They said primate. But that was 1978. We've learned a thing or two. So, yes, we don't know. We can't ask. No, if they did tests on it now, if the Pope would give permission for further testing, then my understanding is that they should be able to ascertain whether it's human blood or not. But you know what? The scientific tests that have already been done on it ascertain that it's blood. Even Hugh Ferry in the fantastic Shroud Wars debates that Dale had with you and Alan, even Hugh Ferry, who, strongly contests the authenticity of the shroud, he concedes that it's real blood. All of the blood tests that were known back in 1978 and still to today, all of those tests, especially for aged blood, ancient blood, all confirm that it is real blood. Now, in terms of the human aspect, when I first learned what Dr. Kearse was saying about how we can no longer confirm that it's primate blood, I'll admit it, even though it didn't shake my belief in the authenticity of the shroud because of all of the other evidence that exists, I'll confess it did, just cause me to just feel like, oh my goodness, we've lost an important piece of evidence in terms of helping to convince others about its authenticity. And I was thinking about it that whole night. And then I came to the conclusion, you know what? Yeah, I'd rather have that evidence than not, but it doesn't really matter in the sense that statistically it doesn't matter, because if that is not human blood, then the shroud has to be a fake. And when you get into the details of what it would take for that shroud, the way it is, to be a fake, that's when you meet the standard that David Hume explains and describes. It would be more miraculous to believe that a forger was capable of creating a shroud that people today are unable to come up with. That people today, with all of our advanced knowledge, cannot figure out how the image was done, how the bloodstains are there without the crusts being removed.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I really am, because the reason why we haven't been able to determine how it was made is because the access that's required to replicate it just hasn't been allowed. It really is that simple.
Well, and also, someone like Kelly Kearse, I believe, is a Christian and obviously quite highly involved in it. But I think you said yourself he was agnostic, so he's not finding the evidence overwhelming either, presumably.
My understanding is that he has not taken a position on it, and I'm not sure why that is. I don't know. Because he is a scientist, he may be trying to, protect his credibility. I don't know. I know.
But if there's evidence, there's evidence. I mean, he should be able to take, anyone can take. This is the problem I have with it. I think that why go to all the trouble of preserving the shroud and then make it unaccessible and the evidence debatable? Because clearly it is. There are people on both sides of the debate. There's people who are non-believers who think it's authentic. There's those who are believers who think it's, who aren't pronouncing, etc. So it should be, why go to all that trouble to leave if God wants us to have the shroud as evidence? It should be slam dunk evidence. I'll believe if it's slam dunk evidence on the shroud. I'll believe again.
It is
a few issues, but
if you ask me, it is slam dunk evidence.
But Kelly Kearse,
so far from it's unreal.
Exactly. Kelly Kearse is a Christian, and he's not even coming out with it.
The foremost shroud expert, Barry Schwartz, I asked him directly. He does not believe that the shroud represents a miracle. He does believe that it's intriguing. He has some theories on how the image got there, although he didn't give them to me on air when I was talking to him. But we have experts who have handled this thing saying they don't believe the way you do. Will you at least acknowledge, or can you at least see how someone can look at the evidence and not agree with you?
Well, of course I can see how they look at it and don't agree with me.
And still be
There's
reasonable human beings.
There's a question as to whether it's reasonable. Okay. No, I don't think it's reasonable.
Okay. Teddy, can I ask you a question? I've been sitting on this for a while, I want to ask you about a particular kind of reasoning error. So occasionally we hear people say, you're from the South. You're from this similar part of the world that I am. So
Southwest, but yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. So, we'd probably have a little tribal conflict, but the views are largely similar. So would you agree that it's a reasoning error if I say, we can put men on the moon, we ought to be able to cure cancer? Do you agree that that's a reasoning error?
Yes.
That just because we can do that, we ought to be, that leaves things open.
Okay, so we do have some basis for agreeing that just because we can do one thing, just because we can put a person on the moon, doesn't mean that we should be able to create warp drive or cure cancer or whatever. This is why I don't care about the Shroud of Turin.
I'm going to get into semantics here.
Hold on. Let me just put a bow on this for the listener, and then I will go back on mute, and you can say whatever you want. This idea that there's this religious piece of cloth that is somehow magic in a religious context. I don't care. I don't care whether Jesus was resurrected from the dead.
Why not?
It has absolutely. I'm answering. It has absolutely nothing to do with whether someone can live forever, or whether someone can be in all places at all times, or whether someone is all powerful, or does or doesn't have an eternal torture chamber, or someone that can read our minds or co-inhabit our bodies. I don't care. Because all of those other claims have to be proved on their own right and not through adoption of the Shroud of Turin. Back on mute.
Why do they have to be proved, all of the other claims in their own right? Why can't the Shroud of Turin be the ultimate evidence of the Shroud of Turin, the way I see it?
You just had the reasoning error. You're promoting the reasoning error.
Forget the reasoning error. That on this show, everybody likes to throw in, that's this fallacy and that's this. Hey, I'm all for, good reasoning. But let's all get into the real world where we have to make decisions. We're constantly making risk-benefit analysis.
Sorry, my example was the real world. Was the real world. We do put people on the moon. We have not cured cancer, and you're not going to get away with rephrasing my words. That was a real world example. You agreed it was a reasoning error. I've showed you how it applied to the Shroud.
No, I said that there's some semantical differences. For example, if we can put a man on the moon, that means humans are capable of brilliance. And that same brilliance, yes, does mean, and we have already started curing cancer. So, yeah, the answer is yes. And also, of course, here's a reasoning error. Just because we haven't done something yet doesn't mean that we won't in the future, right?
That's exactly right. And the Shroud of Turin probably has a natural explanation, and you're admitting to it, but you don't know it.
I am saying that, getting back to what David Hume, the atheist, was saying.
Happy to talk about Hume because he always adopted the lesser miracle. Always.
Yeah, look,
it was 2 paragraphs below what you posted on Skeptics and Seekers.
I am adopting his very stringent standard for establishing.
So am I, which includes adopting the lesser miracle position.
And that is his just choice of biases.
Well, and you're choosing your choice of biases.
I am saying, here's the thing, and the other thing is that he said, go where the evidence leads. He just made the mistake of thinking that the evidence is always going to lead to the natural explanation. But I don't accept that.
Then let's pick up right there then, since it seems that we're not going to come to any new faith based on the Shroud. Can you give us an example of another 1 or 2 or 3, or however many you'd like to present, miracles, things that you would consider actual miracles, not just providence?
Well, I would say that the creation of the universe is a miracle. I don't know that I believe in a whole lot of miracles.
Okay. Why would you say the creation is a miracle? Just go with that one.
Well, I mean, I think that there was intelligent design.
Right, but intelligent
involved.
Design is not a miracle.
I think in terms of somebody creating that.
Most broadly speaking, a very intelligent person creating, making something like a universe. It depends on what miracles he had materials he had prior to that. But I suspect that humans could create a universe given enough time and material. So. Using
hey,
your.
David, anything's possible,
So tell me how creating a universe, how the universe being here is a miracle. I mean, there are ways that you can state this that can get to miracle.
It's creating life. And by universe, I mean everything in it, which would include life, and even atheists, it's usually the atheists.
You're saying there's zero ways that can happen naturalistically.
Creating life from non-life?
Well, I mean, we're using the word creating kind of loosely. I'm giving you as much of your language as possible.
Generating. How about generating
the fact that life is from here, non-life? We agree that life is here. Mm-hmm. You're saying that that's a miracle. How is that a miracle?
Well, where did it come from? How did it spring forth?
You're answering a question with a question. That's just answering with ignorance. I've got as much ignorance as you do. In fact, I might have more. Do I win?
Just remember, there is an exception to the argument from ignorance, and the exception to it is when you've got scientific evidence where people have been researching something for a long stretch of time, qualified, credible people, and that is an exception. And so people have been.
You haven't proven that exception applies to creation of the universe.
Really? How much?
No.
You've done nothing to answer the question.
How much time do we get for that exception? So if smart people haven't answered it in 100 years, then does it go to miracle, or do we get 1,000 years, or do we get 200 years? How long before we have to throw up our hands and say, well, it's a miracle?
Well, for as long as life has existed, nobody has shown
we've only had modern
that
science
life
for the
can
last
be created
bit
from
here.
non-life.
We've only had modern science here for the last little bit. So I think you're being a little bit unfair. How long do scientists get a shot at it before we have to take it away and say, okay, it's a miracle, guys, it's a wrap?
Okay, but let me bring you back down to away from academics and back to reality.
Okay, in this back to reality, are you going to explain to me how the universe being here is a miracle? Because I asked you to present to me what you thought was a miracle.
Because we have not seen science, with all of our advancements going to the moon, we have not seen life be created from non-life. So somebody, an unmoved mover, even you, David, I remember saying in one of the podcasts where I almost fell out of my chair, said that you think that you pretty much could go with there having been an unmoved mover.
I didn't say an unmoved mover. I said a first mover, which in this case would be like an advanced alien civilization.
And what basis do you have to think that there's an advanced alien civilization?
I
you have none.
Basis. But I don't have any basis. But I didn't say that.
So why would you pull that out of your hat?
Well, it didn't come out of my hat. Would you like to know exactly where it came from?
I think I know where it came from.
Okay, well, just being precise here. So I did not. I didn't say that I believe that that's where the universe came from. I just said that it would not scar me or shock me if some advanced alien race, was the first mover for this universe. That's not actually something that I would say is impossible. I don't know that it is or not.
Me, it's very convenient for an atheist that you naturally glom on to the idea that aliens would do it when we have a shroud with lots of evidence
glom onto the idea that aliens would do it. I just said that it's possible.
Christian God exists.
The aliens
so
could have produced
not,
your shroud.
In all,
if the Christian God exists, he can show up and answer these questions.
All of your choices
opening it
in
up,
logical reasoning, why do you jump to aliens?
Do you agree that if the Christian God exists, he can show up and answer these questions?
Sure, he could. Okay. He could do whatever he wants.
But he doesn't. Before opening this up a little bit more, I just want the record to show what I asked you for was for you to produce, just something else that you thought was a miracle. And here you've produced another very highly debatable thing. And so where I kind of want to open up the discussion to next is what we on the panel would consider a better miracle. So
y'all are going to pull up baloney stuff.
Yes, we are.
Of course,
so grant
us,
and
I'm going to agree with you.
Well, we've got the Shroud of Turin already on the table.
That's not baloney.
We're just matching the nonsense.
It's more like souse meat.
When you're pulling scientists from Los Alamos National Laboratory, where
now all you're doing
weapons,
is ad hominem attack. This is nothing but ad hominem attack.
Andrew,
this is nothing but ad hominem attack.
I didn't throw an ad hominem attack.
Hold. I did do a little bit of writing about what I think would be a better miracle, and it might be somewhat productive just to have some conversation over the types of things that might be more convincing. I mean, are we?
Oh, you're going to be picking the baloney stuff.
Hey,
and the shroud isn't.
You just
the shroud isn't.
You just made two thickly sliced souse meat sandwiches. And those of us from the South know what that is. I am going to make some bologna now. You may have some, or you may mute your mic. I am going to offer what I believe would be a better miracle for me, because obviously the shroud is a good miracle for you, and it seems to do the job. I don't know why it does, but it seems to do the job for you.
Science, compelling science from renowned world experts. That's what compels it.
So for me, a better miracle would be one that has some lasting and positive consequences on the world. This is because the claim of God is not simply that he's powerful. Any genie is powerful. The claim of God is that he is good and loving and wants everyone to be saved. And we extrapolate a God that does not want more suffering in the world that needs to be. And so I would need to see the kinds of miracles.
Who says that God doesn't?
I would need to see the kinds of miracles
suffering
that produced that kind of result. And these are not the kinds of miracles that Christians present to me. The kinds of miracles that Christians present are no more consequential to me than Ganesh's drinking milk. And this is why I just don't care if there was some powerful being that can make statues drink milk, and I don't care if there's some powerful being that can make perfectly rounded blood clots. That does not, in fact, cure any disease. Just pick a disease. Any disease, diabetes. I'm diabetic. I would love to see that magically cured, or better yet, have never seen an instance of it at all. I would love
Many diseases have been cured.
I would love to see when Jesus cured the blind man that he said, you know what, not just this man, but all men. No one will be born blind in this world. That would have been an amazing feat. It would have required no artifacts. That would have been incredible.
All of the scientific advancements count in that direction?
Excuse me. That would be the kind of miracle that would make sense to me. That would be the kind of miracle that would make me look twice at this God, look twice at the miracle, examine it a little bit more closely, and then maybe take up that wager from Pascal that you were referring to before. But as long as we're talking about the kinds of miracles that act on pieces of cloth that we can't fully examine, or that purportedly cure one person's broken leg that the world does not know about, or things that just, God, I prayed and God gave me a good parking spot. If this is the power of your God, and these are the things he cares about, screw that guy. I need a miracle more consequential than that. That is for me. Sarah, is there a type of miracle that would make you raise your head and look twice?
Oh, I'm going to have to go with the amputee cliche, I'm afraid. I think if God healed an amputee, then maybe I would reconsider the whole thing.
What do you mean by amputee? What if he cleared the cataract up in somebody? Would that be the same as curing an amputee for you?
I don't know. As I say, I'm actually, the bar was set so low in previously it would have just had to be convincing to me, and that was it. It could have been my own personal shroud, my own personal feeling, my own personal experience would have been sufficient. Now I guess the bar's a little bit higher, and I suppose something like the amputees all started growing back their limbs, I would think
so
I tell you what, there's this week we've had the perfect opportunity. I don't know if anyone else has been following what's been happening in Bethel Church in California, but there's been unfortunately one of the leaders' little girls died at 2 quite suddenly last week. Obviously a horrific, tragic, unexplained death, and obviously thoughts are with the family because it's just an awful thing to go through. However, they felt that the God was telling them that this little girl was going to be raised from the dead. So the entire church and 90,000 people on I think maybe not quite 90,000 people, but several thousands of likes on Instagram, on Facebook. Everybody's following it. Everybody's praying all around the world. There's people in Venezuela. There's people doing dances for it. They're holding meetings every night. Everybody's getting whipped up into a frenzy. It's actually quite disturbing to watch because the poor mother is on stage in God knows what state, but she's in some form of denial up there, just prancing around, thinking that waving her arms and singing loudly, etc., is going to bring this poor child back. It's distressing to watch, and frankly, I think mental health services should have been dispatched.
And by the way, if they raise this little girl, handing us her onesie isn't good enough.
Right. However, she has been pronounced dead with a death certificate, and she is in a morgue. But these people truly believed, and there is people saying, "I'm standing with you. I believe. Breathe, child. Breathe. Get up, little girl." They're quoting the Jairus' daughter quote. There is much faith. Anybody who dared say this seems a little bit strange was like, "Well, if you haven't got faith, step away. Just go away. This is going to be one with worship." Day after day, her mother was on there saying, "Day 3 is a great day for a resurrection." Day 5, day 3, 4, 5. We've stopped at day 5, 6. Now it's been appalling to watch, absolutely horrific. And I just wonder what the come down is for the family, because when the adrenaline wears off, when all the hype, because this is all it is, they have whipped themselves up into a frenzy. When all that dies down, she's not only going to have to deal with the reality of the situation that her daughter's died, but also all the hype and her faith collapsing probably, that Jesus let her down, because they were not just, "I've got a hunch that God does these things." This was absolutely to be stood upon, and one with worship were the words they were going to say. They were coming against this thing. Now it's just that would have been a good miracle. God had all there's the press getting involved, there's the death certificate, she's in a morgue, etc. Raise that child 6 days later, and that would be a fairly convincing miracle, I think. But it's not happened, and they finally, thank goodness, stopped at the craziness and calmed down, and have issued a statement saying that they are now preparing for a memorial service. But I just wonder what the faithful, all these people who've been there saying, "I stand, I believe, I've had a dream." So many people had dreams of this child walking and standing up again, and and it's just not happened. And I just wonder what that does to people's faith and and view of God is like, and well, it would also bring up lots of questions. God lets 4,000 children a day die of starvation, and why pick up this one little girl from California? And it would raise other questions anyway. So I don't know. But that was pretty appalling to watch.
Matthew, what kind of miracle would you rather see? Obviously, a piece of cloth doesn't do it. Obviously, the creation of the universe doesn't do it. Your bar is way high, Matthew.
My bar is high because I've seen way too many failures, and we need to be able to test things properly. If God really is real, then his evidence for him needs to meet a pretty decent standard, because if God is real, then it changes everything. And I literally mean everything. It's quite telling that when I'll rewind a bit. When I said at the beginning, when you asked about for a miracle, I said it needs to be something we can confirm can't be explained naturally. And that is the standard by which I hold. People do amazingly recover from close to death, or sometimes we even have stories of people have been declared dead and then apparently recover from that. We're beginning to learn now in medicine that people can survive being technically dead in a really cold state for a significant period of time. People have fallen into frozen lakes, been pulled out 40 minutes later, and somehow been revived. And it wasn't that many years ago where that would have been considered a miracle. But we actually now know that the cold has an amazing life-preserving quality, to the point where if people are in a state of medical shock, they actually pump chilled IV fluid through their veins to cool their body core down really slowly, because that buys the people on the operating table 1 or 2 hours of time to save this person's life. It's no longer a miracle. It's something that we know naturally. I think it's quite telling that when pressed for something that's an example of a miracle, we get questionable things like the Shroud, which is highly questionable, or like the existence of the universe, which again is something that we really don't fully understand. And miracles always go, and their life is given by things which we don't fully know. And I need something that's an awful lot better than that. Miracle needs to be something that we can show can't be done any other way, which is why I like Sarah's answer about a limb regrowing. Okay, we know a lizard can grow its tail, so to see a mammal grow a limb, okay, possibly is technically impossible. How can we know what?
How do we know that is technically impossible in terms of a limb regrowing? With what you were describing, which, we've all read stories about how now, we see sometimes people are in ice, in ice water for a long stretch of time. So scientific anomalies sometimes after a while we end up becoming more knowledgeable about them and understanding things. I don't dispute that, not one bit. But the thing is, for somebody who does not want to believe, you can see a limb regrowing, and there's going to be something that you come up with. Oh, somebody must have put something with LSD in my drink and I hallucinated it. There's always going to be something for the person who does not want to believe. And then one has to kind of delve into why is that? Because if one is just objective with evidence, scrutinize the evidence. And yeah, if I saw a limb regrowing right in front of me, I'd be pretty convinced of that. But again, who knows? There could be reasons.
What if it was a Hindu guru?
That's what I was going to say, yeah.
Who regrew the limb? Would you become Hindu?
If I saw, if I was told that somebody, I'd have to have really good evidence for it. I'm not going to take it on.
Well, what if the evidence was as good as the Shroud evidence?
Look, I'd go where the evidence points.
So you would become a Hindu?
under certain circumstances, if that's where the historical, the scientific evidence goes, because again, the Shroud.
Are you familiar with Satya Sai Baba?
No, I'm not.
He's one of my favorite Hindus. He's like the second or third coming of Jesus. I don't know how many times Jesus has come. There was David Koresh, and so, I mean, there's a lot of comings of Jesus. I don't know. But he's one of them, and he's a guy who could not only perform many up-close miracles, but he raised the dead at least twice. There are interviews of the
he allegedly.
There were interviews of people he raised. There, to the extent that documentation existed, I think we have better documentation for the resurrections of Satya Sai Baba than we do of Jesus. Yet you are a Christian and you stubbornly refuse to become a Hindu.
Well, what's the evidence of the reserection?
The evidence has been around for a long time. How come you haven't looked into it by now? Aren't you a real seeker?
How come I've never even heard of them?
I don't know. I'm starting to question whether you are really honest about seeking.
I'm not a seeker. I've always said I'm not a seeker. I believe that I have found what the truth is.
You're taking away some of my fun here. This podcast is in 2 parts. Please flip the record over to side B. In the event that you are not listening on a vinyl record, please search for part 2 of this discussion in a podcast feed near you.